Obviously, net terms are fantastic when you really understand how to utilize them. Debt's another very large one. And these are things that, like, these are financial instruments. I'm a finance major right now as well, full time. There's certain financial instruments that, when used correctly and at the right opportune moment, can have a dramatic effect in terms of multipliers. And so what I mean by that is, let's say you are launching a new product. That's fantastic. From wholesale specifically, what we like to do is place small test orders. We're trying to mitigate risk. But once we've mitigated risk, we know that our inventory is selling through. Now it's just a question of, how do I increase my volume of sales? Okay, let's go take some debt, or let's take net terms with a specific supplier so that we can immediately increase our returns on that money. So what a lot of sellers unfortunately don't think of or don't fully understand is that you shouldn't always look at the unit economics. Sometimes you need to look at the holistic picture. In playing the math game, like, if you really kind of think about what we do here, it's a math equation, and you're just looking at how to best optimize that equation for a profitable outcome. Sometimes that's actually giving up a little bit of margin per unit to make more money in total, which sounds counterintuitive, but it happens all day long.
The one that gives you the most long-term profitability is as bootstrapped and organic as possible, meaning you're not having to borrow money, especially not expensive money. And you're also able to still make profit on your current sales. So think about, you have two sides to this. You can unload your current inventory by either discounting it to try to earn some market share, or you can have somebody infuse cash into your business so that you can grow really quickly. And both of those options are expensive. You're either giving up the short-term profit on a sale of a good, or you're giving somebody else an interest rate, whether it's a bank loan that has a good interest rate, or it's a Amazon lending or payability where you have a much higher interest rate. Those are expensive ways, and they can end up putting you in a trap where you run out of money. You don't have enough money to continue scaling. It is slower and more difficult to just select the right products that have a real competitive advantage and can therefore command a high margin to begin with, and then to self-fund your growth by letting the profits from your products that come in, using those profits to then make your next purchases, and being slower to take on money. In America, normally we coach if our sellers are wanting to go down this route, we would coach them to wait until they're small business administration qualified to try to take a loan, because that's going to be the cheapest money they can get on the market, and it's going to allow them to scale most effectively, where they get to keep the most profits in the long run.
One of the biggest things from a psychological standpoint that I've noticed, and I have so many people argue with me back and forth on this, but I promise you it makes sense if you do the math. Let's take something as simple as a compound equation, and not that we have to do this, but if you understand the difference between something that compounds, right? So it exponentially increases, or something that is linear. It's a straight line. When we can move or churn through our inventory in a quicker, higher frequency, our returns are much higher. And so this is another kind of confusing or counterintuitive sounding thing. If I can move, let's say I'm getting 10% ROI on my inventory, and I can move that in 30 days. That's fantastic. I'm going to get 10%. But instead, what happens when I split from that one product that I'm getting 10% on in 30 days, I only buy 15 days worth. I still have half of my money left over, which I can then put into product B. Okay, well, if I'm getting 10% in 30 days, it's probably better if I get 10% every 15 days, right? So if let's get rid of the compound situation. We went from making 10% in 30 days to making 20% in 30 days with a simple decision. And that's actually, it's not necessarily about buying less over time, because you still want to maximize the volume. It's just the time frames is what we're trying to optimize for. So when it comes to cash flow management, a lot of it is really predicting and forecasting, but it's also finding this interesting balance where we don't want to pull back our inventory. We just want to optimize the way we're purchasing this, right? Because you can take any business, and a lot of people in wholesale will say, well, I can just place a very large order. It can last me 3 to 6 months, and it's less work for me. And that's true. Here's the hard part, though. When you're competing, you need every competitive advantage you can. And so having a higher frequency of orders means you're churning through your inventory in a quicker time frame, which means you're maximizing your profits. So that's, I like to think in terms of like major growth levers instead of optimizing for these little things. That's a big one. I mean, it was a big one for me. So I went from ordering 30 days worth of inventory to 2 weeks. And that is factoring in lead time, by the way. And everything changed. Profits completely started to soar because I'm churning through my capital, right? So if I only have $10,000 to spend, I only have $10,000 to spend. So it's my job as the business owner, as the entrepreneur, to make sure I'm, optimizing the returns on that money. I can either get the 10% or I can get the 20% plus. A lot of what we do, and a lot of my philosophy, is risk mitigation. So we're a high capital intensive business. That means risk mitigation needs to be built into the systems, everything you do at a fundamental level. So for wholesale specifically, let's say we find a supplier, the brand looks great, the product listing looks fantastic, but there might be something I'm missing. So yeah, I could theoretically, based off my initial calculation, spend 10 grand a month profitably with this brand. Product A, just one listing, right? One SKU. That's great, but I need to confirm that first. And so what I like to do is split my risk mitigation between cash and debt. So cash is used for things that have a high risk. It's gambling, it's speculation. We don't know. Yes, it looks fantastic, but I might order 50 units and realize I missed something. I would rather have something go wrong on 50 units instead of 500 units, right? This is just basic psychology here. So I use cash that I do have. So if I do lose that, okay, I don't owe anybody, that's on me. But once I've gone through my first test order, so everything's sold through, I then have gone ahead and purchased a full size, let's say it's 2 weeks worth of inventory. Everything is fantastic. We're good here. Okay, well now I want to go from spending, let's say, $2,000 to $10,000 in the next 2 weeks on that with that supplier. The way I'm going to do that is now leveraging debt, right? Assuming I have good debt structure, I'm not paying 20% on, interest rate here. Make sure it makes sense, right? But you use these debt instruments at the right time, and that's kind of how I pace it, right? So I'm using cash, especially for people getting started with not a lot of cash. Use the cash when things are risky. Use debt when things are really less risky. And we're testing the waters the whole time, and we're looking not for when things go right, but for when they could go wrong. And so I think this is a big issue too with people sourcing, is they look for reasons to buy inventory versus reasons not to buy inventory. So I'm poking holes in my hypothesis the entire time.
I think you see sellers, we see them all over the map, but the average seller borrows too much too quickly, in my opinion, meaning they didn't have enough of their own cash to initially invest in the business, and the products that they decided to sell weren't profitable enough. And so because of those two factors, they were undercapitalized, and there wasn't enough margin coming in after they made the sale and paid for the advertising. And as a result, they didn't have a choice but to borrow. Well, at that point, their business doesn't have credit, and so they're having to borrow against their house or against their personal credit. And if you don't have the collateral to go against those loans, so say you can't put up a house or a warehouse, then the cost of that money, the cost of capital, the interest rate, the fees are just going to be really, really high. And so I would say that on the average, most of the less than $1 million a year sellers that we encounter have borrowed too quickly and have borrowed at too high an interest rate. And they're kind of praying that they can scale themselves out of trouble. And my experience shows me that doesn't always work out. It's really, really important to focus on having profitable products that are really differentiated, something different that the customer really likes, whether it's your brand or some intellectual property or a unique approach to solving a problem. But I would say on average, most sellers get really, really aggressive. And that's why a lot of them fail. But the ones that make it are able to do what we described. They're able to scale out of trouble, and they can get healthier financially.
There's times when you use cash for testing, but once the system, if you will, is kind of proven, okay, now we can pour debt into it. So as an example, if I know that I get my Facebook ads tweaked, let's say I put $5,000 cash into this testing, and I get it to where over the course of 3 months, I have a pretty consistent ROI. I know for every dollar I spend, I get $2 back. Great. Now it's finding out how much I can spend. And so I can go raise, let's say, $50,000 to start increasing that ad spend. What I'm not going to do is just take it from, let's say, $1,000 a month to 10. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to slowly raise it, see where it breaks, but you're still having to iterate, tweak, do split testing, all that stuff. But I'm just trying to maintain, at the very least, a positive ROI. So from a brand standpoint, a lot of brands have no problem breaking even on their ad spend to get a sale, because that's more product in the hands of customers, right? So this is helping build brand equity, goodwill, things of that nature. But the framework's exactly the same as what I mentioned earlier, which is you have to understand, is this a test, or is this something that is predictable that I can then afford to slowly, add debt to it? No different if it's a product, if it's a service, if it's advertising, it all applies the same way.